You won't believe what Mark Carney tried to hide from Canadians.
Clarify then or emphasize the RCMP did not have access to all material evidence on the strongest theory surrounding the Prime Minister's potential criminality involving obstruction of justice, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
There is one person who had the authority to expand the parameters of that order in council, and that is the Prime Minister himself, correct?
I would have to say, Mr. Chair, I'm not exactly sure.
In Canadian federal politics, the Canucks are represented by two separate yet unequal groups: the globalists who sold out and the opposition trying to salvage a country. These are their stories.
You won't believe what Mark Carney tried to hide from Canadians. Buried within Carney's massive 700-page budget bill is a measure that gives cabinet ministers wide discretion to exempt any entity from any federal law on the books, except the criminal code, for up to 6 years. So what this means is that any minister in Mark Carney's government could give any individual or corporation the ability to bypass virtually any federal law. The scope that a minister would have to exempt an individual or corporation from federal laws is extremely broad. The minister only needs to claim that an exemption would encourage innovation, competitiveness, or economic growth, and is in the public interest. That could mean just about anything. So take a big corporation bidding on a federal project. Under these powers, if a minister determined that the project would facilitate jobs and economic growth, the minister could decide, for example, to exempt the corporation from the federal government's procurement and contracting rules and award a sole source contract to that corporation, bypassing the bidding process.
What sorts of situations could that be? Well, it could mean that Brookfield could be exempted from complying with the Lobbying Act, from having to report all the times that they're lobbying.
It's pretty obvious that the exercise of these wide powers could open the floodgates to all kinds of conflicts of interest and corruption. And to top it off, a minister would have wide discretion to keep the public in the dark about having granted an exemption. A minister could hide the scope, the particulars, and even the name of the individual or corporation that the exemption was granted to if the minister determined that it was in the interest of protecting so-called confidential or personal information. So not only will ministers have wide and unprecedented power to exempt individuals and corporations from laws and regulations without any checks and balances, they also have wide discretion to do it secretly, behind closed doors, without any level of transparency. And speaking of a lack of transparency, there has been absolutely no transparency surrounding the introduction of these new powers. There was no announcement or press release. There hasn't been so much as a whisper from anyone in Carney's government about these new powers. Instead, they were buried in a massive budget bill. Clearly, Mark Carney was hoping that no one would take notice and that they would be able to sneak these new powers through without any public scrutiny. We've seen this movie before from these Liberals. In fact, the Liberals did exactly the same thing when they buried a deferred prosecution agreement regime in the 2018 budget bill. Within weeks of the passage of the 2018 budget bill, Justin Trudeau put pressure on his Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, to drop the bribery case against SNC-Lavalin with a deferred prosecution agreement. It was all by design. The deferred prosecution agreement regime was snuck into the budget bill for the corrupt purpose of giving a get-out-of-jail-free card to SNC-Lavalin, which of course had deep ties to Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party. So why does Mark Carney want to give his ministers the power to exempt individuals and corporations from the law? We don't know, but something is clearly going on. It doesn't pass the smell test. That's why I've introduced a motion at the Ethics Committee.
I would like to put on notice the following motion.
To launch an investigation into Mark Carney's government to get to the bottom of what amounts to an outrageous abuse of power. Sneaking this measure into a budget bill and hoping that no one would notice, a measure that grants sweeping new powers that will undermine the rule of law and open the door to all manner of abuse and corruption. We need to get to the bottom of this. Mark Carney has a lot of explaining.
We'll get back to the absurdity of Canadian federal politics in a moment. Just a friendly reminder to smash the like, hit subscribe. Please leave a comment below if you have something to share. Let's get back to the nutty video.
Mr. Chair, thank you to the witnesses. Part of the RCMP's examination to determine whether the Prime Minister violated Section 139, Sub 2 of Criminal Code by committing obstruction of justice, correct? That was part of the RCMP's examination.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
And paragraph 19 of the RCMP investigation report states that the strongest theory towards an offense of obstruction of justice was that the Prime Minister shuffled Jody Wilson-Raybould out of the position of Attorney General so that a new Attorney General would make a different decision regarding the prosecution of SNC Lavalin, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
And it's fair to say that the RCMP did not have access to all material evidence surrounding Ms. Wilson-Raybould being shuffled out as Attorney General, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
And so, just to clarify then or emphasize, the RCMP did not have access to all material evidence on the strongest theory surrounding the Prime Minister's potential criminality involving obstruction of justice, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
And the reason the RCMP did not have access to that material evidence on what was central to determining whether the Prime Minister broke the law was because of the parameters of the scope of the Order of Council with respect to the waiver of cabinet confidentiality, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. The parameters did not allow us to fully look into this one. However, I should just add...
Thank you for that. You answered it. The parameters did not allow you to get that evidence. Now, there is one person who had the authority to expand the parameters of that order in council, and that is the Prime Minister himself, correct?
I would have to say, Mr. Chair, I'm not exactly sure of the exact process of where the Prime Minister would be involved in such a decision. However, I do believe the decision has to be made within the somewhere within the government.
I would submit the decision would have to be made by the Prime Minister, but the RCMP went and requested an expansion of the scope to obtain that evidence, to follow that evidence, correct?
Before we proceeded with the assessment, yes, we did make a request for an expansion to the parameters.
I would just add, Mr. Cooper, it was not to follow the evidence, it's to glean additional information. That could be evidence.
Correct. And that request was turned down on August 30th, 2019.
I would have to say, Mr. Chair, that the request for the expansion was not allowed.
It was turned down, and it was turned down by the PCO, the Prime Minister's Department, correct?
Mr. Chair, we did receive a letter from the Department of Justice. I could not remember exactly, specifically, if this came from the...
Well, it was from the PCO, and that's in the RCMP's investigation report. And would it be fair to say that the refusal by the Prime Minister's personal department, the PCO, to expand the scope of the order in council significantly impeded the full investigation into the Prime Minister's potential obstruction of justice?
It limited our capability of pursuing a full investigation.
And it would have limited it in a fairly significant way. Because after all, we're talking about going to the heart of the matter of obstruction.
And again, I don't know what additional, not knowing what additional information is out there, it's hard for me to speculate that there's a Pandora box out there which is full of information, so it's hard for us without speculating.
Well, let the record show that the Prime Minister's Department, the PCO, obstructed the RCMP investigation into the Prime Minister's potential obstruction of justice. Are you aware of any other Canadian who can single-handedly block the RCMP from investigating his own criminality in such an effective way as the Prime Minister?
Good question. Fantastic.
I wouldn't use the term, Mr. President, I wouldn't use the term block. The RCMP is, when it runs an investigation, it operates within the parameters and the regulations that we're allowed to. And we see international security investigation as well, where there's some information that we don't have access to, we can't use into an investigation. So It's the parameters. It's the parameters that we are.
I think the answer to that question is there is no one who has such powers. And was any explanation provided by the Prime Minister's personal department why there was this refusal to expand the scope of the order in council?
Again, Mr. Chair, as far as for a response on this one, of course, it was indicated, of course, the importance, of course, of these privileges that do exist. They are there for a reason, and again, as the Commissioner mentioned, we do have to operate within these parameters.
It would seem to me to be part of a pattern of a cover-up.
That's right.
That's what it would seem to me to be. How can the Prime Minister be subject to the rule of law, like every other Canadian, if his personal department can shield him from an RCMP criminal investigation?
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll let individuals draw their own conclusion. What I come back to is we operate within a set of regulations and parameters that, unfortunately, we made the effort to go and get additional information, and it was refused.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Two-tier
Thank
system
you.
of justice, I would say.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Now, speaking of devout Catholicism, this spring, Mr. Carney went to the Vatican to meet Pope Leo. Then he rushed home to make sure Canada wasn't wearing any protection when we got screwed by the United States. But elbows up? Seriously? When this guy met Donald Trump, he got on his knees so fast, Francois Legault wanted to use the notwithstanding clause.
Canadian federal politics are absurd. We're going to stick a fork in that video. It's over. My name's Aaron. This is Canadian Looney. Smash the like, hit subscribe. Please leave a comment below if you have something to share. Enjoy this playlist. Check out this video. We've got lots of things to watch. Aaron, Canadian Looney. We'll catch you in the next video. Thank you for watching this one. Ciao for now.